All right, before we start, I would like everybody. I know we just took a break, but I'm going to do something I think is very important. I'll tell you why. I want to take 25 to 30 seconds for you to go shake hands with somebody that you don't know. 25 seconds. We'll start now. Well, so the reason why I bring this up, I want to ask a question to the group. There is a study. It's the longest living study at Harvard, and that is around happiness. Does anybody know what the answer is? Longest living study around happiness. Social connection. I didn't ask you. Human connection is the number one form of happiness. So I think, again, it's just important for us to take a moment to understand the importance of human connection and interaction. I feel like as time's gone on, we see less and less and less of that. So hopefully it's just a little daily reminder of something simple you can do. Say hi to somebody. Take a moment. But we're going to be switching from, I know we went into a very heavy topic around addiction. Obviously, Joseph and Dr. Raghu are back up here. And something that I'm learning a lot more about, and just as I've gone through my journey with substance abuse, I obviously understood that there was a severe mental health condition that was underlying, and that was a piece of it. So again, some of you guys may know some of this, some of you may not, but I really just want to kind of hit home with both of you guys on just the basics, right? So it's really kind of transitioning, and I know addiction, mental health, is it the chicken or the egg? I mean, there's so much that goes into it, but I really want to be specific around mental health, and maybe you guys can just give me a minute overview each of what is mental health.
Mental health is not at all dissimilar to physical health. It's your daily practices, your daily affirmations, how you speak to yourself, how you speak to the people around you that are important, how you speak to the people around you that aren't important, that can't do anything for you. Mental health is a reflection of how you feel about yourself, you feel about your surroundings, and you feel about your place in society and within your community. Just as you would perform exercise to strengthen a muscle, you have to engage within your community, you have to engage yourself in order to improve the relationship you have with yourself. It's no different than any other form of exercise, but mental health, from my perspective, not as a psychiatrist, but as an emergency physician and addiction specialist, is your perception of yourself, your self-worth, your self-value, and how that relates to where you see yourself in your community.
Thank you.
Very good. Well said. I mean, that was great. And so as a psychiatrist, I mean, I see mental health as a spectrum. I see it as something that we are all on, each and every one of us, and we're somewhere on that spectrum in any given day. And I try to think about it as the relationship with the self, with someone, with others in your community, and with the global surroundings, and thinking about where you fit into that bucket. And so when I look at mental health from a psychiatrist perspective, in treating somebody or helping somebody, it's looking at their sleep, most importantly, their community and social connection, right? And then the biology and psychology of it as well, and nutrition. And those are the pillars that I'm looking at. And I really emphasize, as Jason brought up earlier, the social connection in that piece.
No, I love that. And I think just giving a high level overview of that, because it kind of goes right into the next question, and I want to be more specific, obviously, with kids.
Yeah.
What are signs and symptoms to be aware of a poor or declining mental health?
So engagement, I think, is huge, especially a change in engagement when you had students or you had children that previously greatly enjoyed science class or greatly enjoyed volleyball or greatly enjoyed being productive in art or in music. Whenever you see a dramatic change in their engagement with things that are normally an important piece of their identity, an important piece of who they are, I think that is a potential warning sign, or at least a red flag to pay attention to. The other thing I think is changes in normal behavior. There are some quiet people. There are some loud people. I was very much that student that drove most of you nuts because I couldn't sit still and I couldn't stop talking. So it was weird for me to come to school and not speak to anybody. And I'm very thankful that I had some very astute teachers way back when who were able to identify that. But I think knowing your students, knowing what they like, what they don't like, their behavior, their personality, and when you see deviations from the norm, those are the things you should pay attention to.
I love that. And, I think on a clinical setting, we also look at, right, deviations from the norm, changes in sleep, changes in preference for, certain types of foods, changes in their social engagement with friends, all these signs of like anxiety, depression that can potentially develop. I just want to take a step back from that and also say, you all as educators, kids are spending a majority of their time with you. And so you actually know them quite well, and you're going to be the first ones to probably detect a lot of that. And so as something as simple as like, why is the student all of a sudden coming in 2 minutes late, 5 minutes late? What's actually going on at home in their context? What types of experiences are they witnessing at home? Is there something going on with their parents or the family system or a sibling that's causing them to come in late? Because when families reach out to me, they're always saying, oh my gosh, our kid is like starting to be anxious, or they're misbehaving, or not doing their work, or starting to go in late. And you often find that there's something bigger going on, and that the child is having to lug this baggage into the classroom with them. And I'm sure that many of you have seen this with certain children as well in your own classroom. So, I love what you said, Dr. Martin, and I want to just add this next layer of context of, let's take a step back, and instead of pointing a finger at the individual kid of something's going off with them, take a step back and think about, what's the context here that's happening? Is there something bigger? Because when I work with families, there's literally sit at the dining room table with them or on the patio and try to get the parents to not talk as much and give the child a voice to start to actually address what's going on from their perspective. And you as educators, oftentimes children feel the safest with you when their parents aren't around, or someone else at home is not around, and they can open up to you. So keep that in mind as well.
Thank you, Dr. Raghu. What are some of the, specifically to you, Dr. Raghu, is what are some of the things that you're seeing that are becoming more apparent and more alarming within the younger demographic, as far as when it comes to mental health?
Yeah, obviously social media, which I'll touch on, but before that, one of the biggest things is also what I'm noticing is two things. One is difficulty forming social relationships. I think that, the pandemic was a huge contributor to that, which we heard about earlier from the Lieutenant Governor, which is a lot of children weren't able to develop those social skills in person. Jason, you alluded to social connection. I really love the term micro connections, right? The types of smirks or smiles you get when you go to the bookstore or the coffee shop. And think about this whole generation that didn't have that exposure. Like, those are little dopamine releases that they didn't get. And so there's a little bit of, like, lack of a better word, and awkwardness. And I want friends, I want to make friends, I want to connect, but like, I don't really have the skills to do that at an age where we might have had it, right? And so there's actually been this, what we notice is there's a delay in this sort of development that's happening. And when it gets to a point where the kid really cannot kind of form into independence on its own, we call it kind of a failure to launch. And we notice that now into the early 20s and into the 20s and sometimes later for certain kids of, hey, I left home and was on my own at 18 or 20, but like, you're really not able to do it because you haven't developed those skill sets. And so that's one piece, is this delay in certain types of skill sets and development that's happening. The second piece of it, I'll say, is that the world is very overwhelming for them. They're bombarded with endless media and content on what they need to be, what they think they need to be. They're only seeing half the story, right? I mean, people present what they want to present. And Jason alluded earlier to, like, you had MySpace with, we were all friends with Tom on MySpace. But it's like, that's what we had. We had to do like AOL dial-up to get there. But now it's like instant feed, and these companies have designed these tools to hijack the nucleus accumbens and dopamine system that Dr. Martin was eloquently talking about just before this. And they are smart. And when that happens, the child's brain is hijacked and all perceptions are just taken over. And so that's a huge contributor to not only the development of potential mental health conditions, but also the exacerbation of underlying mental health conditions. And that's the biggest, one of the biggest concerns that I and we as a field have right now moving forward for adolescent mental health is, yes, there's been a rise generally in mental health, but the severity of it has been fueled by this underlying digital addiction.
Well, let's talk about that a little more. So again, I know you just gave a high level overview of that, but for both of you, why is social media addicting?
So we kind of discussed it ad nauseum, dopamine. I think the important thing to recognize is that social media filled a vacuum, and it continues to fill and occupy more and more space in the absence of community, in the absence of parenting, in the absence of good education, in the absence of mentorship, in the absence of coaching. All of those paradigms that I just talked about are power dynamic. Teachers and professors have power over their students. That's why the relationship is so sacred. Coaches have power over their participants. That's why that relationship is so sacred. Parents have power over their children. That's why that relationship is so sacred. We now, in the absence of comfort and convenience, have ceded a lot of those difficult conversations, a lot of those difficult moments, for fear of making people uncomfortable in a non-productive way, or fear in ourselves of being able to handle that conversation in a productive way, to the internet. And social media is very happy to take as much of that space over as you allow it. And that comes from self-worth, that comes from faith, or that comes to faith, that comes to profession, that comes to presentation, what's attractive, what's not, what music is trendy, what is not, what is art, what is not. And the thing I remind parents of and patients of is that social media is the ultimate curated version of beauty. There's very little reality that tends to be posted, and that's because people don't want to necessarily see things that make them uncomfortable, and now they have a perfect medium and vacuum that will erase anything that is uncomfortable and only put things that are beautiful or flashy in the attempt to sell a curated version. But everybody in this room is old enough to know life is just ugly, and so sometimes you have to deal with that.
Dr. Raghu, I'm curious, with that being said, and that's really well put, Joseph, when it comes to social media bullying, can you talk about how that affects the mental health?
Yeah, I just pulled these up because I think it'll be useful as well.
Yeah.
And I want to add one thing to what you're saying, which is like, there is a positive side, right? One is that people are speaking more about mental health because of social media. There's advocacy work going on. However, like, there's also the pop psychology side of it, where kids also come to me sometimes and they're like, I think I have this diagnosis. And part of it is like they want to fit into a certain group or community, right? And so there's a little bit of that as well. And that's maybe the hot take. My hot take of the day is like, speaking a little too much about it sometimes can also have an effect. So this stat is from about 2 years ago, and it's probably worse now. And so I just want to ask also, like, how many of you are aware of this? That it was 7.5 hours or more? Yeah. And I'm gonna skip ahead real quick to the question that you had, which is like, how does it become addicting, right? And the basic answer to that is that it takes over your brain. It takes over the limbic system, right? The emotional state, the control that you have. The tools are designed without any stops or speed bumps in it, right? I mean, I fall prey to this as a mid-30-year-old, like the scrolling endlessly. There's tagging, there's mentions, there's, Snapchat does an effective job at creating streaks that reward and gamify kids to continue to use it. There's anonymous features, which gets to the bullying aspect, right? Which is that you can hide behind your screen and say whatever the hell you want to people without thinking about how it's impacting them. When you're face to face right now and I'm saying something to you, I'm seeing your emotional reaction change, your facial features change, And my own neurons and my own muscles in my face will unconsciously react to that. And that impacts how I treat somebody. You don't have that when you're behind a screen, right? I mean, we're all seeing it right now. It's you can say whatever you want, and it's there, and you can be anonymous and you can hide behind it and not get that feedback. And that causes a level of bullying that is beyond, right, when we were children, and it was like, you're on the playground, you're kind of bullying, but then you go home. But there's no break, right? So just as there's no stopping cues when you're scrolling on Instagram or TikTok, there's no stopping cues when it comes to the bullying. Kids are dealing with it at school, at home, at night. And so it comes back to what I was saying earlier, that you as educators, the context is important of understanding, like, your job just got way harder, by the way, in this world, of like, okay, what else are they dealing with? Are they getting bullied by other kids online on social media, and what's going on there? And the cyberbullying has gotten so pervasive. You know, a lot of kids parents are aware that, okay, my kid has this Instagram account or this TikTok account, but they're not aware that they have an additional 10 private or like hidden anonymous accounts that they're using to get on everything from bullying to the dark web to maybe grooming other students or getting groomed by other individuals online. It is a very, I don't want to elicit fear, because there are solutions that, you know, we're working on, which we'll get to, but the reality is, it is scary. And Jason, I don't know if I'm answering your question,
No,
but it's the bullying is at another level.
No, it is, and again, we're not going to be able to. I mean, there's so much to talk around this one specific thing, right? I mean, there's so much that's being revealed from social media, and again, there's, like Ashley talked about, there's some of the benefits that could be brought from that, but there's also a lot of dangers that need to be addressed from that. And I think in just a couple minutes, again, because I wish we had more time for all this, because I want to make sure we get through all of this. But I mean, do you want to continue just on some of a couple minutes of the high levels of the dangers of social media? Through your slides and stuff. And then I really want to target some questions for you guys, because again, I want to be solution oriented with some of these takeaways, but I think it's providing some of this education could be very informative and informational for the audience.
Yeah, sure, I'll dive into this a bit. So the bottom line of the neurobiological changes, which Dr. Martin did an amazing job talking about the addiction pathway, social media takes over in a similar pathway. I'm sure some of you guys, who's heard of the Anxious Generation book? Okay, I'm happy it came out. I'm happy that it's brought attention. There's a few places that I disagree with it, which is that putting only age restrictions is not necessarily one solution, right? People said don't drink till 21. How many of us drank before we were 21? Right? Kids are smart. They're going to get through it. I try to see the relationship with social media similar to someone who might be struggling with disordered eating behaviors. You can't stop eating, right? Technology is here to stay. How do we develop a healthier relationship with it? And so the tough part of this is that it does take over your brain. It takes over self-control, decision-making, and motivation in a child whose brain is still developing. I spoke a little bit about this on how it does that. Kind of going into some of the basic science behind that, right, is that it's the perfect neurobiological storm when you have a brain that's plastic and developing every single day, every interaction, and then you have a tool that says, hey, I'm going to take over very vital parts and keep you in a state of heightened arousal that makes you much more sensitive to rejection, but also acceptance. And also that you're going to have greater responsiveness to other cues without the person even being there. I'm going to go through these a little fast to stay on time, but they are printed out for you to have as a resource, and I'm happy to share even more as well. The other thing is that the circuitry is taken over, as I mentioned. So, you know, we're looking at a period of time when the brain is so primed for reward seeking. As teens, you're constantly doing things to try to get reward. And then you can understand with not much impulse control, right? So let's keep that in mind. But then when you're on your device, it's just next level. The presence of peers amplifies the dynamics, right? Adolescents are also more sensitive than adults for things like looking for peer validation, group belonging. They're more sensitive to rejection and exclusion, as you all know as educators. And their biology is just so sensitive to that social feedback that we're speaking about so far. And so they're more susceptible to getting pulled into that social media aspect where you're getting a streak, you're getting a reward, you're getting a like, or you're getting a message, or even you're getting that dopamine jump from the bubble before the text even comes through. And that's the extent that it takes over your brain. And text really changed the game, as we mentioned here, right? So it's hard to know when to turn it off. Content sticks around. There's persistence as well. It's 24/7. There's no boundaries, as I mentioned. That leads to a lot of bullying. The digital content can be copied and modified. Some of you might be aware of the extent of like AI deep fakes that are going around, and it's very challenging to understand, okay, did this person say this or is this made up? And it's very, very challenging. And so I won't go too much into that because we can go down these rabbit holes, kind of like endless scrolling. Searchability, there's algorithmic reinforcement, and the most important thing, absence of physical cues, right? The facial expressions are so vital to human biology and social connection and development as a person, and you don't have that. And it's not just the kids. Imagine your child sitting next to you, you're on your phone, and they're trying to get your attention. You're scrolling through something, but you're not actually facially reacting to it. And so you're basically just looking at it blankly. So they don't even know what's going on with you. And it's almost like dad, dad, dad. And you're not giving, you don't do this by the way, but that I know of. But that is almost equivalent, if not equivalent, to a parenting style that we call neglectful parenting. You're not trying to be neglectful, but you've also been taken over by it. So we have to role model as parents and as adults as well. As I mentioned earlier, mental health is a spectrum, so is digital well-being. It's a blend of emotional health and digital health. Yeah, and so should we come to a little bit to the solutions, which is like, we need to focus on cognitive appraisal. So let's just take this for example, right? Friend leaves you on red, you immediately think you've been ditched and they hate you. Has this happened to anyone in the room? Yeah, so even as an adult, right? So we have to stop thinking about that and think about how do we reframe that. We have to think about self-compassion, and I'm gonna skip through to this one term, emotional granularity, so we can kind of get back to a conversation here, which is, and there's some tips here that I put for the role of parents and parent support, but, okay. I'll focus on this and then we'll get back to this conversation, which is emotional granularity. I think as educators, this is the one thing when we talk about social media, when we talk about modern day adolescent mental health, that I would love for you to focus on, which is if children don't know the language to express verbally how they're feeling, it becomes very challenging for them to have a voice. Whether that's at home, whether that's with their peers, or whether that's in the classroom. And these days, it's easier for them to then say, I'm gonna grab from my phone and deal with this uncomfortable thing that's going on in my body that I don't know what it is. And so what I would say is if you can start to have the conversation and teach kids emotional granularity, which is giving them the vocabulary of, hey, if you're feeling this way, it might be this emotion that's going on, and just getting as specific as you can, because you can't tame what you can't name, right? And so if there's one takeaway I would say is one of the prime solutions is like, let's really focus on a culture where we can have the language around what people are feeling so that they feel less of a need to grab for something else and have their brain hijacked in discomfort.
I love that. Well, so I want to, again, looking at, and there's so much information here.
Yeah, there's a lot. I skipped through it, but it's in there, so ask me questions.
Well, yeah, so I want to kind of go back to this and just, want to ask you guys some questions that we could take from high level. So what are some signs that my child or student may be struggling and or addicted to social media?
Yeah, well, what you said earlier is it's very similar. They're struggling with mental health, a lot of similar symptoms, isolation, social isolation. There's also some basic things that I notice in kids, which is like, let's say that the parent or educator says, hey, we're gonna make a cell phone pile or a device pile and take it away. There's also a lot of anxiety and fidgety behavior, right? Like physical things to look for as well. Are they really having a hard time staying in place and interacting socially one-on-one? One of the more extreme situations I've seen recently was a 6th grader who looks at TikTok and has like conversations with the content, and because it's loud, speaks in a very loud voice, but but she's not getting the back and forth conversation, right? It's like a one-way thing with a content piece. However, the unfortunate piece is like that is now translated to how she speaks in the real world. And so one thing to look for is, has the person lost the ability to distinguish between the digital world and the real world? And that's a very easy thing to happen quickly in a young child.
How do you advocate or set healthy boundaries for a child around devices and social media?
So the answer to that question is very similar to what is the difference between substance use and substance abuse addiction. So when you're consuming anything, if your purpose is directed, intentional, and focused, you're in a good place. I want to have a drink to relax with my wife, talk about our day. The focus is not the alcohol. The focus is relaxing with my wife and talking about our day. The focus is quite literally working on our relationship. So whenever you approach the consumption of anything, if you are looking at it with intentional and focused means, then you're much more protected. If it's mindlessness consumption, there is no goal, or if in a literal sense, if the reason that you're consuming it is distraction. I want to drink because I don't want to think about how terrible my day was. I don't want to think about how many people died. I want to be on TikTok and scroll endlessly because I don't want to think about the fact that my kid just yelled at me and told me they hate me. Like, this is distraction from things that objectively matter infinitely more, and yet we're choosing to distract ourselves rather than pay attention and be intentional and be living life with intentionality and purpose.
Yeah, and I like this distinction, which is on your note, you said mindless, right? So that's mindful. Active versus passive use, right? That this is what's really critical, is taking a moment to pause and understand, like, why did I open this? What was the purpose of using this? And we should all, first of all, we keep talking about kids, but like we should all be doing this as well, the way that we use our devices. So this is an example, right? I get anxious. I mean, how many people do you see, or yourself, when you go into a coffee shop or a bookstore, or you're waiting for a friend to meet you? How long does it take before you pull your phone out? Anyone? Jason?
I ain't answering that.
That's the answer, right? Because it's pretty quick. So, and it's okay, right? But maybe you're gonna pull it out and say, I'm learning about something, I'm gonna look something up instead. And so just being more active and mindful about your use is important, and use educators that you can talk about this in the classroom with your kids as well.
I love that. What is like an appropriate age for kids to be introduced to technology? Me and my wife talk about this all the time with our friends. I'll say that we are looking at the latter years of introducing. And again, as I know it's
Like
I know
30?
No, like we're yeah, 50. I think realistically, I mean, like get her a flip phone probably when she's like 15 or 16, but like, you know, and it's like, and again, it's because there's a lot of people that like, we're like, oh, she's going to be bullied or different. And again, we got years to go. She's 7 years old right now, right? But really in conversation and talking about that, that's obviously something I think that is very true. And I see it with whether it's on family members or people that we work with, how much damage this has caused because there's not been appropriate boundaries or regulations that are put into play. And I mean, this really is dictating a lot of their life. And so, I mean, I've literally had friends come back to Ashley and I saying like, hey, how, you know, like, well, you're going to, you know, she's just going to get bullied because she doesn't have a phone or different things like this. And so, but again, I'd rather deal with those repercussions and handle that as us knowing what we know and knowing that we're protecting in the long term. So what is kind of your guys' thoughts around that? I mean, you guys are obviously from the clinical side are more engaged with this. But again, it's like, I mean, it goes back to, and this will be our last question, but I know this is, you know, go back to like the people that created these things. Their own kids and everybody is not on them.
Yeah, they're not, that's true.
So what is the appropriate age? Is there an appropriate age?
So like anything, there is no blanket response. There is no blanket appropriate age. Some people can handle alcohol responsibly at the age of 16. Most cannot, but some can. Some people can handle it responsibly at 25. Some cannot. Some can't handle it ever. And I think it has to be a very personalized conversation. And I think the most important thing from my perspective, both professional and personal, is do you understand your place in the real world? Do you have love and respect for the life that you're living out here, the real world? Do you feel comfortable in your place as a son, as a daughter, as a spouse? Do you feel engaged in this current world? Or is the reason that you're looking to engage in this world specifically because you feel so lonely that you don't feel like you're engaged in your current real house, in your current real classroom, in your current real football field? When you're looking towards anything, whether it's social media, whether it's cocaine, whether it's alcohol, nicotine, whatever, if you're looking at anything as an escape or a distraction from the poor circumstances you find yourself in, i.e. ACE scores, then no matter how responsible or intelligent you are or insightful you are doomed to failure.
Yeah. Oh man, that's spot on. I'll just add, it really depends on the cognitive development of the child as well. There are age restrictions already on some of these tools, on Instagram, on Snapchat, but you can just say you're a different age and get an account, and that's what kids do. I also want to be mindful of the socioeconomic influences with this as well, right? So, for example, certain families I work with, they have the ability to say, okay, we're not going to get you a phone yet, but we're going to get you an Apple Watch so that you can make calls and we can know where you are. Not everyone can do that. Sometimes it's helpful to have laptops or tablets for students who might not have that at home, and they can use it to do homework or have access. And there's things like that that are really critical, and we have to be mindful of as we can't make an overarching solution, basically, is what I'm trying to say. But yes, so let me come to a solution real quick, because I know we're getting to time. Okay. So because of this, I've tried to bring all of my hot takes and thoughts into one thing, which is social media and tech is here to stay. So along with one of my best friends, Larissa May, we started a new company called Ginkgo, Ginko, play off the leaf. And we're basically developing a tool that brings active tech consumption. So based on your age and cognitive development, you'll have access to certain things to actually develop a healthier relationship with technology. And I just wanted to share this QR code. It's a free Substack newsletter that I'm going to be running, and we have a lot of content on there for parents and teachers, as well as free workshops, and you can just keep asking questions, develop, and bring what's going on in your classroom to the community so we can all learn from each other. And it is powered by teens, actually. So just wanted to put that out there. But Jason, there's no age. The world has tried that with cigarettes. They've tried it with alcohol. I think you as parents who are engaged, your kids, also talk to the teachers and say, hey, what are we doing? And it's not just you, and you brought up one thing that I'll touch on very briefly, which is there a fear that your kid will be bullied because they don't have the device? And I think that's where it's important for you, as Dr. Martin mentioned, engaging with the community and coming together and saying with other families, what are we gonna do responsibly as a community for our kids as a whole?
Yeah. You guys crushed that. Well, we could talk about social media and all the.
Yeah, I can talk forever. We talk too much.
But appreciate you guys so much on this topic. You guys, let's thank Dr. Joseph Martin and Raghu.